Is someone who individuals give up their judgment for. You guys do it all the time. When you go to the trainer, when you go to the doctor, and the doctor says X, and you must take Y. You don't look at his wall and say, hey, wait a second, is that degree from a reputable medical school? You don't go and look at all of the other patients and ask the other patients, did he heal you? The fact that you go to the doctor, even if you don't know who he is, you give up a certain sense of, I know better. Okay? There are relationships like that throughout the business world. A lawyer is one of those. An accountant is one of those. A business manager is one of those. You give them money, you expect them to invest it in your best interest. You give up based on their greater knowledge, skill, and understanding. Now, if they allow you, knowing that you're relying on something, to do something that they knew or should have known is wrong, they've committed what's called passive fraud. It's also called a breach of fiduciary duty. A breach of fiduciary duty. Silence is not generally a fraud. Silence is generally not a fraud, unless they had a duty to act and didn't. Okay. False statements made in belief it is true. A false statement made in the belief that it's true makes the contract voidable. Statements of opinion are not fraud. Okay? Oftentimes statements of opinion are going to be called a salesman's puffery. Okay? When the salesman tells you, this is a car with low mileage, and you go in and it's got 150,000 miles. It's low when you compare it to 1,000,000 miles. Okay? If they tell you this is the best car, compared to what? If they tell you things about gas mileage and things like that, as long as they don't tell you a fact, this car will do 32 miles per gallon. That's a fact. This car does great mileage. That's an opinion. Okay? Salesman's language, as long as it is opinionated, rather than a statement of fact, is not considered to be fraud. Why? Well, if you think why, you get a little bit chided about business, right? It tells you, the law anticipates that salesmen are going to a certain extent, stretch the truth. Okay? They're not going to tell you always the complete truth. But the law says we're going to allow that because we want business transactions to take place. But we're going to draw the line when they tell you something that is factually not right. And we're going to tell you that you need to beware that they may not be telling you the truth. Now let me ask you this. For those of you that have bought cars, when you go and buy a used car, do you sit there with the salesperson and believe everything that they tell you?
No.
That's what the law is telling you. Nobody does. And it says, since nobody believes that what they're telling you is 100% true, we're going to allow them to continue that practice as long as what they tell you is not about a fact. Okay? If they're telling you something that is factual, this car has never been in an accident, and you find one of those reports that says that the car was in an accident, that's a statement of fact that's wrong. If they tell you this car is very safe, it's been in 10 accidents.
It's an opinion.
That's their opinion. Okay? Business puffery. Okay. Misstatement of value opinion can amount to fraud. Physical duress. This is easy. I mean, if somebody is physically forced to do something, that's physical duress. Everybody knows that. Okay? Throughout, it doesn't matter what country you are, I don't think that there are many countries that are validating contracts where somebody's been beaten and they sign. Okay? That's physical duress. Okay? Emotional duress is a lot more difficult to ascertain, because generally they require somebody to be in a very weakened emotional situation. Okay? One party's threat affects physical ability of the other to act under free will. And this sort of emotional duress could mean, you know, I know where your wife and kids are. I know where your mom and dad live. Okay, that might be the sort of duress. They haven't told you that they're going to do harm to them, but that might be sufficient. Okay. Economic duress, when one party financially threatens the other into a contract, does not occur when one of the party members has difficult financial circumstances or one party member drives a hard bargain to make advantages of the urgency of the other party. Okay. There may be laws with regards to this second portion. Okay. For example, after a hurricane, generally in business, demand drives the price, right? Supply and demand. The more there is something, the less it costs. The less there is something, the more it costs. After a hurricane, there may not be a lot of plywood, right? So according to the rule of supply and demand, if you've got a whole bunch of plywoods, what happens to the price of your plywood? No, if you've got a whole bunch and there's very little in the market, it goes up. Okay? But there are laws in the state of Florida in particular that says that you cannot take advantage of that situation in order to drive the price up. There's just so much you can ask for. But generally that is not an issue. So generally under the law, the rule is that supply does regulate what the price is going to be with regards to a particular product. Okay. Now let me give you an example of this. When one party financially threatens others into a contract. You guys don't have to deal with this, especially in South Florida. But in the United States, there were companies, large companies, very large companies. They were so large that what they did was that they had what were called company towns. Have you heard of company towns? A company town was, in essence, a town that was built by the manufacturer of some product. And their employees lived in that town while they worked in the factory. For example, there was a train manufacturer. They manufactured the cars. And they had a town. And if you wanted to work for this company, you had to live in this particular town. They owned the hotel. They owned the apartments. They owned the grocery store. They owned everything. So in order for you to buy the things that you needed to pay for your housing, you were paying them. To a certain extent, that's economic duress. Okay? Because you can't decide, I'm going to go live in Hialeah. Because if you work for me, you gotta live here. At that point in time, that's a sort of utilization of duress with regards to the contract. Undue influence. Person in special relationship causes another's action contrary to free will. Contracts in this situation are voidable. A family taking care of an elderly person. Decide that they're going to sell all their stuff. Okay? Elderly person is relying on the family to take care of them. I recently heard a story about an old lady that didn't have many relatives, and then all of a sudden brought in some tenants, and the tenants have, in essence, by keeping her company, taken over all of her finances. And their question is there anything that can be done? Under those circumstances, they're exercising undue influence because she's selling stuff that she wouldn't otherwise do. The only problem is that she's unwilling to take any action. She doesn't have any family that is going to kind of take a position with regards to it because all of her family lives outside of the country. So sometimes undue influence doesn't have a solution, but it exists all the time. Okay. Remedies for breach of contract because of fraud, duress, or undue influence. These three mistakes render contracts voidable. Rescind to set a contract aside, return what you received. Okay. There's a couple of remedies for contracts that you should know. The number one remedy is breach of contract. In a breach of contract action, what you're looking for are something called damages. And damages is how you've been set back because of that contract. Okay? So whatever you've lost is a breach of contract. But there are other remedies. Number one, you can have specific performance. Specific performance means you want the party to do what they promised to do. And in this case, we're talking about the remedy of rescind. A rescission means you want the court to say there's no contract. Okay? Rescission means you want the court to say there's no contract. To set the contract aside, return what you received under the contract. Okay? After rescission, one can bring a suit to recover any money, goods, or other things of value given up plus damages. If the contract is executory on your part, you may refuse to perform. If the other party sues, you can plead mistake, fraud, duress, or undue influence as a complete defense. After rescission, bring a suit to have the contract judicially declared void. A written contract does not accurately express the party's agreement. You may sue for judicial correction. Now, when we were talking about the statute of frauds 2 weeks ago, we're talking about the statute of frauds. Let me refresh your recollection as to the statute of frauds. The statute of frauds is a statute that says that under certain circumstances you must have a writing. And we said that contracts for real estate must be in writing. We said that contracts that were for more than $500 had to be in writing. The contracts that could not by their terms be accomplished in a year had to be in writing. Okay? Now, sometimes those contracts, that simple writing, doesn't set out what the deal was exactly. If it doesn't, then you can go to court and have the court determine exactly what the parties are supposed to do under the contract. Okay? You can have the court clarify. Sometimes the writing is different than the agreement, and you can have the court utilize that extrinsic evidence to determine what it is. Generally, what courts refuse to do is when there's a writing that says you got to pay $100. It allows you to bring evidence that says it was really $50. Okay? If the writing is specific as to a term, courts are very reluctant to change the term. Any questions? Okay. Those are the 2 chapters that we did poorly. Okay. So please focus on defective agreements, offer and acceptance. Okay. You're going to find, probably starting either later today or tomorrow, on the website, you're going to, not this stuff, I've already done this stuff, but we need to move forward, and what we're going to be moving forward to is personal property. We introduced a little bit after the midterm. In particular, this is what I want you to have in mind, because when I see you next, we're going to divide you into groups, and you are going to show me and you're going to give me examples of special relationships that happen when you give your property to somebody else. You take your car to the mechanic. What's the relationship? How is that relationship formed? What are the duties of the mechanic? What do they have to do with regards to your property? What happens when you go next door and you say to your neighbor, listen, can I borrow your lawnmower? What are your duties with regards to that lawnmower? What if it breaks? Is it your responsibility? Is it their responsibility? Okay, so we're going to be talking about these sorts of relationships, and what I would like to do is in the next class get you to, I'll divide the different relationships and have each group explain the importance of or significance of that relationship and how it becomes important. Okay, we've got the risk of loss, how much care has to be used, and so on. Okay? All right, ladies and gentlemen, please sign in. If you haven't seen the extra credit check out of the 10 points, I have it there, but please leave me the sheet because I haven't recorded it, and if it's gone, I won't even remember that you gave me one. I do need your quizzes.
Do you want the Scantrons?
You can keep the Scantrons, you can give them back to me. I've already got that. What I need is the quizzes for today. And that's a very good question. Here we go.
Vou botar entre as 2 escolhas, na verdade.
Oh, absolutely.
Marcos, vocês ganharam 4 pontos no extra crédito.
4 pontos, filho.
E 2.
Como é que você sabe?
Porque não é escrito ali, só tu pegar essa coisa.
Não é? Não é.
Vi 4 também.
De 10? 4 de 10?